We good? Thank you. Good evening, and welcome to the New York City Council hybrid hearing on the Committee on Rules, Privilege, and Election. At this time, please silence all electronic devices. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the meeting of the Committee on Rules, Privileges, and Elections. I'm Councilmember Keith Powers, Chair of the Rules Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the other members of the committee who are present. We are currently joined by Speaker Adrian Adams, and I believe we'll be joined by other colleagues shortly. I'd like to acknowledge the council of this committee, Jeff Campagna, and the committee staff that worked on the appointments that we're hearing today. Chief Ethics Counsel Pearl Moore, Director of the Public Integrity Division, Francesca Del Vecchia, and Deputy Director Alicia Vassal. By letters dated April 28, 2023, Mayor Eric Adams requested the advice and consent of the council regarding the appointments of Kenneth Chan, Sarah Kaufman, Paul Bader, and Thomas Sorrentino to the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. Pursuant to Section 2301 of the Charter, Paul Bader was recommended for the appointment by the Queens delegation to the City Council, and Thomas Sorrentino was recommended by the Brooklyn delegation to the City Council. Today, the City Council will consider whether to give these candidates our advice and consent. Before we start, I want to recognize Speaker Adrian Adams to offer opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank all of the committee staff for their work on today's hearing and our colleagues who are on the way. The four candidates before us today have been nominated to be members of the Taxi and Limousine Commission, a body that has the power to establish rates for yellow and green cabs and has the power to establish and enforce public policy with respect to for-hire vehicles, all of which are an essential part of the city's transportation. The charter provides for the commission to have 9 members, but due to recent resignations, the commission has been practically non-functional as its membership has dwindled down to just 3 members. If the 4 nominees we consider are approved by the committee and the full council, the commission will once again be able to conduct its vital business for the city. The taxi and for-hire vehicle industry has undergone revolutionary changes in the last 10 years. Just as the city established the green taxi system to expand the availability of street hail cars outside of Manhattan and mandated the switch to the accessible taxi of tomorrow, ride-hail technology became ubiquitous, making it possible to summon cars virtually anywhere without competing with fellow pedestrians. Companies like Uber and Lyft have assumed a significant share of business that used to go to yellow cabs, making it particularly difficult, if not impossible, for medallion owners to make their loan payments. However, unlike street hail cars, which are subject to a uniform rate setting by TLC, ride-hail apps use surge pricing to exploit changes in demand during rush hours, rainstorms, and other events. Surge pricing calculates what the market will bear at any given moment. The proliferation of ride-hail technology appears to be unstoppable. But questions remain about whether the ride-hail apps and their market share are promoting the transportation policy goals that have been the underpinning of the taxi industry over the last 50 years, and thus whether TLC's policies need to be adjusted to bring the use of these technologies into alignment with those goals, or whether the goals themselves need to change. I look forward to hearing from the candidates nominated to the TLC, who will have to consider these issues and many others in the year ahead. Kenneth Chan worked as an intellectual property attorney at companies like United Technologies, Avaya, Corning, and Access-RE from 1994 to 2020. Since 2015, he has been the managing director of Navistone LLC, a real estate development company. He's been recommended by Kevin Kim, the commissioner of the New York City Department of Small Business Services. Sarah Kaufman has served in various roles at NYU's Rudin Center for Transportation Policy and Management since 2011, and as of July 2022, has served as the center's interim executive director. From 2007 to 2011, Ms. Kaufman was a project coordinator for emerging and intelligent transportation systems at the MTA. She's published extensively on transportation policy and served on a number of boards, including Transportation Alternatives and TLC's Black Car and Livery Task Force. Thomas Sorrentino has been serving on the TLC since he was appointed by Mayor de Blasio in 2017. The Brooklyn delegation of the council recently recommended him to reappointment for a new term. Mr. Sorrentino is an accountant with the firm O'Connor Davies. Paul Bader has held varied positions in the public and private sectors for over 50 years. From 1970 to 1980, Mr. Bader drove a taxi cab for a fleet based in Long Island City in my native Queens. He has owned two printing companies, City Imprint from 1984 to 2002, and New York Prints, LLC in Long Island City from 2013 to the present. He has served two stints in the New York City Comptroller's Office, 2002 to 2005, and from January to December of 2001. He also served in the council as a special assistant to Speaker Christine Quinn. Thank you all for your commitment to public service. I congratulate you on your nominations and look forward to hearing your testimony. Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Just a little bit of background before we begin. The New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, known as the TLC, was created pursuant to Local Law 12 of 1971. Chapter 65 of the New York City Charter establishes the TLC with the purpose of the continuance, development, and improvement of taxi and limousine service in New York City. It's the purpose of the commission to establish an overall public transportation policy governing taxi, coach, limousine, wheelchair accessible van services, and commuter van services as it relates to the overall public transportation network in New York City. The commission establishes certain rates, standards of service, insurance and minimum coverage, and criteria for the licensing of vehicles, drivers, chauffeurs, owners, and operators. The commission also has the power to establish fines and penalties for violations of its rules. The commission consists of 9 members appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of the city council. 5 of such members, 1 from each borough, must be recommended for appointment by the respective borough delegations of the city council. TLC members are appointed for a term of 7 years and can serve until the appointment and qualification of a successor. The mayor designates 1 TLC member to act as the chair and chief executive officer. The chair has the power to employ, assign, and oversee the officers and employees of the organization. Pursuant to the charter, the chair's position is full-time, and the mayor establishes compensation. Members other than the chair serve without compensation. We have already done introductions of everyone, so I'm going to move on. I also want to note that we are joined by Transportation Chair, Councilmember Selvena Brooks Powers. We're joined by Councilmember Rita Joseph and Councilmember Mercedes Narcisse. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I'll now ask our council to administer the affirmation.
Please raise your right hands, state your names, and state whether you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your answers to all council member questions and in your testimony before the committee.
Paul Bader, I do.
Tom Sorrentino, I affirm that I will tell the truth.
Sarah Kaufman, I affirm that I will tell the truth.
Kenneth Chan, I affirm that I will tell the truth.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. Congratulations on your nominations, or my condolences, depending on how you want to look at it. I'm just kidding. Thank you guys for being here with us today. We're going to now offer you an opportunity to give opening statements. We can start with Mr. Bader, and we'll move over to Mr. Chan. Thanks so much.
Thank you. As I've indicated before, my name is Paul Bader. Speaker Adams, Chair Powers, and members of the Rules Committee, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the Queens County delegation, many of whom I have known for years, for selecting me as the Queens representative for the Taxi and Limousine Commission. This selection represents their recognition of my many years of community service, working to maintain and improve our wonderful city, and my work experience in various jobs related to the taxi industry and the movement of vehicles along our roads and streets. Madam Speaker, let me also express my appreciation and my shared concern relative to the industry and how it's changed, as you indicated, from when I drove a taxi, which was many, many years ago. The world changes and we must adapt to it. I have been involved in transportation issues in New York City much of my life, including membership on the transportation committees of community boards in both Manhattan, where I was the chair, and Brooklyn. Increasingly, the for-hire vehicle industry is a larger part of our transportation system, and this is a way of being involved in creating a better transportation structure. Professionally, I've been a taxi driver, yellow medallion for a fleet, a truck driver, and a driving instructor in this city, where I've lived my whole life. Additionally, having worked in city government in a variety of positions dealing with its communities and neighborhoods, I'm extremely knowledgeable regarding the streets and byways, and more importantly, the flow and rhythm of how people move around this city. I am aware of some of the many initiatives the Taxi and Limousine Commission is working on to protect and assist the drivers, as well as ensuring that they are receiving their fair share of the fare, while also improving the riding experience for the customers, and I look forward to working with them on these and other issues affecting the for-hire vehicle industry in our city. Supporting the livelihood of our drivers is a crucial and vital part of promoting the health and welfare of our drivers across this spectrum. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Sorrentino, and I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to be here today to speak with you. I currently serve as a commissioner on the Taxi and Limousine Commission, having previously been appointed by Mayor Bill de Blasio in August of 2017. I have served our city in that capacity over the past 6 years with commitment and devotedness, and I have tried my best to address the issues at hand with care, objectivity, and thoughtfulness. I would very much like to continue being of service to our city and using my experience and background to work and collaborate with members of the Commission, including the TLC staff and colleague commissioners, along with the various stakeholders to address the challenges and the issues facing the industry, to formulate policies and regulations that take into account the concerns and considerations of the parties who provide such an important part of our city's transportation system, as well as to ensuring that the riding public is well served throughout all parts of the city in a safe, accessible, and economical way. I am enthusiastic and humbled to be considered for reappointment to a full term on the Commission. During the time that I have served on the Commission, I've had the privilege of having worked with several TLC chairs and acting chairs, along with the talented members of the TLC staff, to help address many issues, challenges, and the changing landscape that the industry has faced over these many years. Over the past years, I have sat through many TLC public hearings and have listened firsthand to the testimony of many individuals, including drivers, medallion owners, FHV licensees, coalition groups, elected officials, TLC policymakers, industry experts, and members of the riding public. And I have heard their views and opinions on a variety of topics and issues related to accessibility, diminished medallion values, medallion owner loan and debt concerns, FHV licensing policies, driver pay, safety, and well-being considerations, economic and environmental impact concerns, as well as matters that impact the riding public in providing safe and reliable transportation. I am proud to have worked in dialogue with the professional staff members of the TLC and with colleague commissioners to help formulate policy and to pass rules and regulations to address the many issues that have challenged the industry, and in trying to make things better for everyone. Some of the positive achievements and results that I have seen and have been part of include passing broader accessibility regulations, placing limits on and caps on FHV licenses, considering the oversaturation of such licenses at the time, the Medallion Relief Program, and driver pay enhancements. I believe that the time I have spent serving on the Commission, the experience garnered therefrom, my professional background, and my ability to work and collaborate with colleagues, policymakers, and industry participants are attributes that will allow me to continue to provide service that is meaningful and that has value to the Commission, as it leads the charge in regulating the industry and ensuring that all of the stakeholders are well served. One of the focal points that we must always keep in mind is the health and well-being of the drivers. This must always be a paramount consideration in setting policy. The drivers are essential in making the entire system work and are the backbone of providing the transportation to the riding public. To ensure their well-being, it is important for us all to be mindful of both the quality of life and economic considerations, including both driver pay and expenses. These considerations should be factored in while setting policy to ensure a proper balance between the drivers and all the industry stakeholders. Lastly, as a lifelong New York City resident, I have the desire to continue to serve our city and I am committed to dedicating the time and energy needed to fulfill the responsibilities of the position and to perform the work that needs to be done as we move forward as a city and work through the challenges that lie ahead. I want you to know that I have taken this responsibility of being a member of the commission seriously and dutifully, and have not missed a commission hearing or vote during my tenure. I thank you for this time.
Good.
Good afternoon, Speaker Adams, Chair Powers, and members of the Committee on Rules, Privileges, and Elections. My name is Sarah Kaufman, and I come before you today seeking your confirmation and consent to serve as a member of the Taxi and Limousine Commission. Thank you in advance for your consideration and for the opportunity to tell you about myself and why I wish to serve on the TLC. I currently serve as the Interim Director of the Rudin Center for Transportation at the NYU Wagner School of Public Service. In that role, I conduct research and hold gatherings to discuss policy and planning issues around mobility. I am presently working on 2 research projects. First, assessing the City of Buffalo's response to the blizzard in December of 2022, which I hope will be instructive for all cities' responses to extreme weather, as it is inevitable everywhere. Secondly, I'm working on a project applying urbanism principles to the future introduction of autonomous vehicles in American cities. I also host panel discussions and keynote lectures on topics like flooding and transportation, new technologies and accessibility, and the future of micromobility in New York City. I've worked at the Rudin Center since December 2011 and have, throughout that time, worked a great deal to lift up the voices of women and other underrepresented communities in transportation leadership. I have a longstanding interest in gender-based travel and how cities can improve women's safety and caregiving needs. I have developed research and workshops around women's challenges in transportation. The concept under the term pink tax on transportation is that women in New York and other cities tend to pay a premium for their personal safety, when possible, by turning down off-hours employment and opting for more expensive transportation modes, such as choosing taxis or rideshare over public transportation in the name of safety. I have also tried to bring light to other challenges for New Yorkers. This year, I worked with a graduate student to develop a project around language access in the subways, offering suggestions to improve mobility for New York's 1.8 million residents who are considered having limited English proficiency. And in the Emerging Leaders program that I have run for 8 years, I train early career transportation professionals to apply innovative projects and processes to their workplaces. I have designed the program to prioritize admission to individuals who would not otherwise have such an opportunity. Before working at the Rudin Center, I worked at MTA New York City Transit for nearly 5 years. I worked in the Strategic Improvements and Best Practices group, where we looked at comparable transit systems abroad and considered lessons learned. Primarily, I'm proudest of 2 accomplishments during that tenure. First, I launched the MTA's Open Data program, which supplied subway data to the back end of apps, and organized the Developer Feedback Forum. Secondly, I created a social media plan for New York City Transit, getting information like subway delays and weekend construction changes out to the public. I am proud of developing such useful tools for New Yorkers. Prior to the MTA, I worked at Do It between 2006 and 2007. There I worked on the NiceWin network, the private emergency responder wireless network that would ensure communications between first responders during a crisis. I had taken that job right after graduate school at NYU, where I got my graduate degree in urban planning in 2005. During that time, I interned at both the Economic Development Corporation and Do It, and worked on campus with Mitchell Moss at the Taub Urban Research Center. I am a native of New Rochelle, New York, and attended college in St. Louis, Missouri at Washington University. I've lived in New York City since August 2001, and have lived in 7 different apartments in Manhattan and Brooklyn. I am now settled in East Harlem with my family, my husband, who is in his 22nd year of teaching middle school English, and my 2 children, who are both in middle school. Growing up in the suburbs, I always yearned for the city, the vibrancy, the way everyone fits in somewhere, and the chaotic order of things. I always felt that the city just worked. As I learned throughout my career, some things are not as orderly as they seem. I have constantly worked to improve the city I love through both low-hanging fruit and ambitious goals. I have called upon my background in technology to solve some of those issues. This effort has often included collaborating with the Taxi and Limousine Commission, where helping to solve the organization's challenges has been a through line in the last 10 years. Together with the previous Commissioner Mira Joshi, I hosted a hackathon around taxi driver shift changes, where we looked into how to better organize the 4 p.m. turnover for more taxi availability in Manhattan and more localized driver transfers. I served on the data committee, assessing what information should be required from ride-hail providers and how to protect drivers' and riders' identities. In addition, Commissioner Joshi and I convened a public forum about accessibility and for-hire vehicles in the fall of 2019, especially concerning the timeline of regulating wheelchair-accessible vehicles. Finally, under Commissioner Joshi, the TLC staff provided input on my work, bringing innovation to paratransit, encouraging the use of taxis and for-hire vehicles to augment accessoride services. With previous Commissioner Aloysi Heredia Jarmuschuk, I served on the Black Car and Livery Task Force, working to get more drivers back on the streets. Throughout 2020, I assisted on the TLC-led Surface Transportation Recovery Committee. I believe that this work has had at least a somewhat positive impact on New Yorkers' lives and the economic opportunities of drivers. Still, while it has been rewarding to help the Taxi and Limousine Commission think through pressing problems on the sidelines, I'm eager to have a stronger voice on policy. I believe I can be helpful by putting ideas into practice when grappling with the TLC's most pressing challenges. I am eager to learn from my colleagues on the commission and work closely with the TLC staff. It will be an honor to serve on this commission and to help usher the organization through the next few years. Mostly, though, I want to help the greatest city in the world move its people more efficiently, comfortably, equitably, and sustainably. I hope you'll see my candidacy as valuable to the TLC, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Good afternoon, Chair Powers, Speaker Adams, council members. My name is Kenneth Chan, and I come before you today seeking your confirmation and consent to serve as a member of the Taxi and Limousine Commission. Thank you in advance for your consideration and for the opportunity for me to tell you about myself and why I wish to serve on the commission. I am a resident of Brooklyn. I haven't arrived in New York City as an 8-year-old immigrant. I am a proud product of New York City's public educational system. After graduating from the Bronx High School of Science, I attended Cornell University as a chemistry major, and then Syracuse University College of Law for my Juris Doctorate degree. New York City has been great to me and my family. While we experienced firsthand the challenges of being immigrants with modest means, through perseverance and entrepreneurship, we were able to get by and later achieve a comfortable living. I have 3 children. The older 2 are graduating college this month, and our youngest is a junior in high school. Currently, I'm the owner of a small business called Navistone LLC. Its primary business activities are property management and development. I have successfully developed and managed underused and underinvested properties and transformed them into high-functioning facilities that has housed business operations such as manufacturing, commercial kitchens, logistics, art studios, and sound stages. Prior to Navistone, I worked at 3 large U.S. high-tech companies. I served as Asia Regional Intellectual Property Counsel and then as Director of Intellectual Property Strategy for Corning Incorporated. As Regional Counsel, my primary duties were to support the company's growth in Asia, build a group to provide sustained intellectual property support for the company's innovations, and help resolve disputes over the company's intellectual property rights. In doing so, I helped to conclude significant corporate development projects and several high-tech manufacturing investments in Asia. I also led company efforts to analyze new policies and regulations in the region to identify potential impact on the company and develop plans to address these potential impacts. While in Asia, I engage actively with other MNCs as well as NGOs to nurture relationships, share knowledge, and advance advocacy efforts. I I also interacted regularly with U.S. government agencies such as U.S. Patent Trademark Office, U.S. Trade Representative Office, and U.S. Consulate offices to share observations and ideas. As Director of Intellectual Property Strategy at Corning, my primary focus there was to help revamp and improve communication and processes among groups in research, intellectual property protection, and technology commercialization, and doing that among the different product divisions. So this effort required that I work with multiple functional groups within multiple product divisions in order to strengthen a company's intellectual property rights, protect its innovations, and enhance the commercial potential of research results. Before joining Corning, I served as Intellectual Property Counsel and Director of Trademark and Copyright at Avaya Inc. Avaya was a spin-off of Lucent Technologies Inc. that focused on telecommunication applications and devices. As a member of this newly formed entity, I helped shape the company's intellectual property focus and practices and collaborated with product managers to develop business models for many of the company's innovations. At Avaya, I supported research and development efforts, as well as led and successfully concluded numerous technology and M&A transactions, as well as strategic agreements with telecommunication service providers and other key business partners. Prior to Avaya, I served as corporate counsel at the Pratt & Whitney division of United Technologies Corporation. Pratt & Whitney is an aircraft engine manufacturer for both commercial aircraft and military aircraft. At Pratt & Whitney, I gained extensive experience in supply management, commercial transactions, and technology development and implementation. In addition to leading first-of-its-kind corporate-wide supply management initiatives, including the first B2B e-commerce initiative, I also help ensure compliance with applicable regulations such as Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, OFAC, U.S. Export Control Regulations, and ITAR. Working at these three large companies has given me insight into complex organizations and structures, including working within complex regulatory frameworks. It also helped me develop collaboration skills to work with multiple stakeholders in order to complete projects. As I stated earlier, New York City has been great to me and my family. As a passionate and committed lifelong resident, I'm eager to give back to the community that has provided me with countless opportunities. It is this desire to contribute that has drawn me to the opportunity to serve as commissioner for the Taxi and Limousine Commission. I'm also passionate about serving on the TLC because I believe, in conjunction with fellow commissioners, that we can create a positive impact on the lives of New Yorkers by guaranteeing access to safe, reliable, and affordable transportation options. I hope to help usher in a new era of innovations in a way that protects and uplifts drivers and consumers. If confirmed as commissioner, I hope to lean on my professional, small business, and personal experience to work collaboratively with fellow commissioners to continuously improve transportation for all New Yorkers. Thank you for your consideration of my nomination to the Taxi and Limousine Commission. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for your testimony. We're now going to move into some questions. I'm going to first recognize Speaker Adrian Adams for questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Chair Powers. Welcome once again. The three of you have such intriguing backgrounds, and I have something in common with all of you. I'll just put that out there. I'm going to start with my fellow Baysider, Paul Bader. You're actually the only person nominated who's actually driven a taxi. When you were a driver in the 70s, you didn't own your medallion, correct?
That's correct. I drove for a fleet, Crescent and 41st Avenue, main operating. I still remember the name. for those of you who don't remember, basically there were two kinds of medallions at that time, and they had different price structure. One was a fleet medallion that was owned by a fleet, and then there were individual medallions that were owned by individual people. Those of us who drove for fleets also were members of a union at that time, a taxi drivers union. And there was a schedule, a rate schedule that you started at and you went to, and it was based on a percentage of the meter that you got. You started, if I remember correctly, was a couple years ago, I think we started at about 45% and we went up to 50%. And it was based on a variety of parameters that made you go up. But for most people, they went up pretty quickly to the 50%.
Yeah, yeah. So some of us do remember those days. If you had your druthers these days, would you choose to stay in fleet driving, or would you drive for Uber or Lyft or one of those guys? It's a tough question.
No, it's not. Because the individual driver in those days had more recognition and respect than I think that many of them have today. It was a profession that both fleet drivers as well as individual owners did, and it was a middle class job, it enabled you to have a middle class income. We have certainly seen over the more recent years, the incredible economic hardship that drivers at different levels have gone to, particularly, and some of them has even resulted, unfortunately, in suicides, as we know. And so I would certainly, if fleets even existed in the same way and the structure was the same, it would not be would not be a difficult situation. I'd once again drive for a fleet.
No question. Yeah, and I'm particularly sensitive around medallion drivers, taxi drivers. In my area in Southeast Queens, we have a tremendous number of drivers, particularly in Richmond Hill and other areas in Queens.
So I will also augment my answer by saying this. Also at that time, there were what we used to call black cars.
Yes.
And they were, the largest one was a company out of Brooklyn called Black Pearl, that also went into Queens at the time. And I knew why they existed because I was a fleet driver who drove in all 5 boroughs. I was unique in that. There were not that many drivers who would drive all throughout the different boroughs, particularly in certain neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Queens. I learned, and I knew these neighborhoods, I learned, however, that like anything else, if you're willing to drive and you understand that, there's a lot of money to be made. And there was no place that I turned over fast, as we used to turn them over, as certain neighborhoods of, in Brooklyn and Queens. I knew the neighborhoods, I was comfortable driving there, and especially on, and I drove nights, so most of the time, and I served. It was underserved community by the medallion owners in that time.
Yeah, yeah. In thinking about your questions and your questionnaire, we asked you the questions about your views about TLC policies and the for-hire vehicle industry when we sent out our pre-hearing questions, but most of your replies consisted of needing more information. Do you come into this role having any views about what the policies of the TLC should be with respect to street hails and pricing, even in terms of normative values?
Yes. I tend to want to do as much research and get as much background information I can before making definitive conclusions, but clearly there should be a direct correlation between the increase in the fare that an app is charging a consumer and that percentage of that increase which is gonna go to the driver. What that is, I don't have hopefully we get to that point and we'll be able to have more definitive. But yes, clearly it should be in a situation whereby if the app is charging more, the driver should get his fair share of whatever that increase is going to be. It doesn't make sense sometimes to have a dynamic where the price is going up and the driver doesn't benefit from the price going up. I don't want to see that happen. So I want to see whatever we can do to make that equitable. to do that. I also understand that it is that, you have, one of the good things about the old fleet system was there was a shared benefit. The fleet wanted you to do better. The more money that you booked, the more money they made and the more money the driver made. The driving apps now, that no longer exists because they don't really care on each individual car, since they're not having any investment in each individual car, how much they get for that individual car. They just care about how much they're gonna get overall. So which is totally the opposite view of an individual driver who wants to optimize and maximize the return he's gonna get and the income he's gonna get from that amount of time that he sits behind the wheel. It is, for those of you who haven't done it, it is not an easy thing to sit behind the wheel of any kind of vehicle for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time, okay? And I've done it, as you can see, in a variety of times. I know what it's like, especially when you have to sit in traffic, and the drivers must get their fair share of whatever the fare is that's being charged.
I don't disagree with that at all. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to move on to Mrs. Sorrentino. Speaking along the lines of equitability and equity, what's your view of surge pricing?
Some of it is ironic, some of it makes sense, and some of it is ironic. What's ironic is that they have surge pricing that's going to go in at certain times of the day. Well, the irony is that if you pick up a fare at 12 at midnight, it's going to take you less time to get to where you have to go than if you have that same fare at 6 o'clock. So the idea that one has to pay a lot more for a ride which is shorter doesn't really kind of make sense to me, but they can get away with it. And what happens therefore also is that the disproportionate amount of that is going to the app as opposed to going to the driver, because if there is any additional aggravation that's going to be caused, it's going to be the driver working at night, not the app, because the app is electronic. And they don't know the difference between the sun coming up and the sun going down. But for the driver driving, he's the one that has to understand if there's any difference, what that's going to be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bader. Mrs. Sorrentino, you've served as a member of the TLC as the industry has been adjusting to the changes I discussed in my remarks, and you've heard a tremendous amount of feedback from stakeholders about these changes. Based on this experience, what importance do you place on these policies? The first one is ensuring that street hails are always possible, and the second one is ensuring there are always standard fares for people who can't afford dynamic pricing.
Well, thank you. One of the things I have learned over the years of being on the commission, there's a lot of different issues, a lot of different variables that go into play, and one of the things that I have garnered from all the testimony I've heard, all the policies we've tried to pass and analyzing them, is a balance. There's always got to be a balance because there's so many stakeholders now. As Mr. Bader was saying, when he drove, it was the yellow medallions, basically. Now, with the advent of the for-hire vehicles, as we know, how the industry went upside down, basically. And with the all the cars that were on the road, certain caps had to be put in. It impacted driver pay. It impacted value of medallions. There's a lot of different interactive pieces that come to play. So one of the things I believe is that, in terms of analyzing any issue, you've got to look at all the factors. You can't look at it into a vacuum. So with regards to the question you're asking about with fares, I mean, fares with for-hire vehicles, they do surge. That puts a burden on most New Yorkers when that happens. It's hard to manage travel and transportation when you can't rely on reliable and economic transportation. So I think setting policies and fares is something that needs to be looked at very closely and monitored. And I think you have to be flexible and change as things go on. I think that's the key, being flexible and monitoring. And I think the TLC over the years has dealt with many, many issues. And I think, from what I've seen firsthand, is that the heart of the TLC, the professionals who work there, is in the right place. And I think getting information is key. With the advent of technology, I think we need to analyze data in a quicker way, in a more comprehensive way. and change with the times. And moving into a sustainable situation with electric vehicles is also something that's going to be the next wave that we'll have to deal with. So.
I agree. So, Mrs. Sorrentino, you are looking for reappointment. You are a commissioner. You're sitting with 3 individuals that could possibly become your colleagues over the next few weeks or so. So what have you learned from being a TLC commissioner that's been most surprising to you that you can share with 3 individuals that could possibly be your colleagues?
Well, one of the things I've learned, and I have the utmost respect and for is the TLC staff. One of the things that coming in as a novice, as I was 6 years ago, and the question is, how do you get your hands around all the issues, all the information? And one of the things I've learned, and I've worked with various commissioners. I worked with Mira Joshi when I first came on, who's now one of the deputy mayors. I worked with Bill Heinzen as an acting chair. I worked with Ryan Wataja, who's currently there. He was acting chair as well before Commissioner Doe came in, and the predecessor, Aloisi, who just left recently. And one of the things I've learned, no matter who the chair is or the acting chair is, the staff is so professional. They provide you with information on a continuous basis. They prepare you. They have briefings. So you're able to have a dialogue and ask questions to make sure you have a full understanding. And not just to vote because that's the way, you know, the group is going. You have the right to ask questions. So I think one of the things I would share with them is that don't be afraid to engage. I think engagement and collaboration is very important. And that's really the biggest takeaway that I would share with them if they're going to come and embark on this. Because none of us know it all. And I think we all have to keep an open mind and to be objective. I would say being objective and keeping a fair mind is key. And also listening to the folks in the industry. I mean, I've sat through numerous hearings, and I could tell you some of them were heartbreaking. And some of the folks who are here today, I've seen on numerous occasions. And you have to listen to everybody. You have to balance. So that's what I think would be the biggest takeaway that I would share with them.
Thank you, and thank you for your service as a commissioner.
Thank you.
Very much. And thank you for the shout out for the staff as well. Ms. Kaufman, I'm going to come to you for a couple of questions because there's no question that you're an expert in transportation policy and that the TLC has relied on your wisdom in the past. However, some members of the taxi industry have expressed concerns about consulting that you've done for the rideshare company Revel. So can you share with us what Revel is exactly and the nature of the work you did for them?
Sure, thank you. So Revel is a rideshare company, but before they became a rideshare company, they were a they continue to be a shared moped company. And the work I did for them was consulting for the moped company Revel, which the work I did with them predates any work before they became a rideshare company. I looked at safety statistics from 2019 and 2020, looked at how their safety changes after they had some tragic incidents on the mopeds, how the safety changes that they implemented, like requiring selfies with a helmet and detecting the locations of riders more specifically, and also being more specific about who was qualified to be a customer for the service if they had done something irresponsible or reckless, and how much safer the service became after that, and the answer is remarkably safer. I did not do any work with them on their rideshare services, and I don't work with them at all.
Okay. Along those lines, what role do you believe that rideshare apps should have when it comes to shaping policy for the taxi industry, if any?
I don't think that they should have a role in shaping policy, although I do think that for many New Yorkers, that is an important mode of transportation, especially New Yorkers underserved by public transportation who need some other way to get around and perhaps live in an area where they don't have immediate access to street hail taxis. So while I don't see these companies as shaping policy, I do think that there's a balance of voices that need to go into the outcomes.
Okay. I just have one more question for you. In your pre-hearing questions, you wrote that you're open to the implementation of dynamic pricing. While that may benefit individual drivers, is it good transportation policy to allow people with more money to get a ride in the rain than people with less money?
That's a very good point. This is something that, remaining open to it. I obviously have more to learn from the commission and from the experiences of individuals on the ground. So I appreciate that context.
It's going to be an interesting balancing act. Just ask the commissioner there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chan, I've got a couple of questions for you, and I said you've got things in common with me. You were in the telecommunications business. I come from the world of MCI, WinStar, and Info Highway, all rolled into one back in the day. So I've got a little bit of knowledge about Avaya, who we worked with, and Lucent, of course, who we worked with, and Office Phones, and T-Spans, and Hot Cuts, and PBXs, and all of that great stuff. So I just wanted to throw that out there also. You have almost 30 years of experience as an intellectual property attorney. What in your experience, though, has informed your understanding of what constitutes good transportation planning? And based on that understanding, what should the policy goals of regulating the for-hire vehicle industry be?
So let me say that I almost worked for MCI.
Did you really? It was a great company, until they laid me off.
Right. Corning, Avaya, and United Technologies are huge, complex companies. And they also work within very complex regulatory frameworks. So TLC essentially is a regulatory commission. So I think my experience operating within regulatory frameworks will help me to better navigate issues that will come up, working within their boundaries, making sure that we comply, and understanding the landscape that we have to operate within. I think particularly United Technologies and Corning, these are companies with multiple divisions, dozens and dozens of product lines, and the ability to work with people to get things done, to understand issues, to understand where stakeholders are with respect to challenges, to the issues that we face. I think the ability to collaborate and really filter through the issues and the matrix of considerations, that is something that I hope would be helpful if confirmed as a commissioner, because from hearing from and reading about the issues that TLC faces, these are complex issues.
Yeah.
And I hope that my background could lend itself to help solve some of those issues.
Okay, I'm just going to ask a couple more questions just to dig a little bit deeper into your answers to our pre-hearing questions. You suggested that bodegas should be allowed to charge a fee in exchange for giving members of the public the ability to hail a taxi. Do you believe New Yorkers would actually support a policy that would require them to pay money for a service they can currently obtain by standing on the corner and raising their hands?
So the concept of the question is that in a scenario where getting a ride is all done electronically, what if we don't have a smartphone, or someone doesn't have a smartphone to be able to call for a ride? So some of the options I described or included perhaps enabling Link NYC kiosks to have a function for consumers to walk up to it and get a ride. The second option, idea really, is to also add similar function to bus stops, which are way more plentiful than Link NYC kiosks. Now, thinking about a situation where I'm in a place where this may be a little far from bus stop, are there alternatives? Are there ideas? And what I thought could be looked into is, well, you know, there's always a business at a corner store, right? And maybe could we come up with a partnership with those businesses for them to help neighbors call for a ride? Now, the fee doesn't have to be extravagant, because if I'm going to a corner store to call for a ride, there's a decent chance that I'll buy a cup of coffee too. So there is increased foot traffic that also benefits those businesses. Now, what the fee should be, I don't have an opinion on that, but it is an idea that we could look into.
Okay, let's stick with Link NYC for a minute, and my final questions. I'm glad you brought it up. In speaking about Link NYC, the capability of Link NYC, once again, in your pre-hearing questions, you suggested that you'd be in favor of allowing all taxis to rely on ride-hail apps, and that for people without phones, you'd provide access to such apps by expanding access to Link NYC by increasing the number of kiosks and expanding Link NYC to bus stops. Your answer, though, seems to indicate that you would support repealing all regulations that require yellow and green taxis to pick up street hails. Would that be your position?
No, I don't favor repealing regulations that require taxis to accept street hails.
Okay. My final question is...
Sorry,
go ahead.
Speaker, the idea is not to add Link NYC kiosks to bus stops, but to add the function to bus stops for residents to call for a ride.
Got it. Okay, thank you for the clarity very much. My final question, once again, around the area of Link NYC, because it's come up so often in my district right now, and we're in discussions around the construction of the towers across the city. The Link NYC kiosks that have been constructed are enormous. They're 30-foot towers, which residents in many neighborhoods, including my own, have raised a lot of objections. Where would you expand them, and how would you address community opposition?
With respect to the form factor of Link NYC kiosks, I know you know, because having worked in telecommunication industry, they don't need to be that big. They don't
That's
need to
right.
be that tall. Cannot be too small, but they don't need to be that big. In terms of community oppositions to Link NYC kiosks, I would have to understand what those oppositions are, what those concerns are.
I can
but-
share them with you.
Yes, absolutely. And, but, you know, Link NYC kiosks, from my understanding of its functions, they do provide some utility to residents.
Okay. Some of the opposition, just to share, and then I'll close, I'll give it back over to the chair. Some of the opposition in my district particularly, and maybe in my colleagues' districts as well, of course, is the size. That's number one. Number two would be the lack of appropriate advisement that they were going to be constructed in the neighborhood. So that's lack of notice to the community boards. It's causing concern. The amount of whatever may be impacting the airwaves, the air, or whatever. Most of it boils down to one consistent issue, and that is the lack of communication across the board. And communication, you and I take that different ways, given our backgrounds, but it is, you know, the lack of, you know, connection and communicating.
Absolutely, and that is vital. It is disappointing to hear that the construction of Link NYC kiosks may not have been properly communicated to local residents and keeping the public informed. That is something I cannot really speak much on.
Understood. Thank you very much. Thank
you.
you all for your testimony. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I want to repeat my also opposition to the massive towers as well. We've also been joined by Councilmember Sanchez, and we have Councilmember Borelli here remote as well. I just want to jump into a few sort of more general questions. This has been an industry in turbulence for the last decade or two with the advent of, even predating The sort of rise of the apps, a lot of debates about the green taxis versus the black car industry versus the livery industry versus the traditional yellow industry, and lots of divisions within the entirety of the TLC. You bring in the apps, you have an entirely new fight and debate. And it feels like it's stabilized a little bit these days, but I still would be interested to hear from each. Like, what do you see as the most pressing issue right now facing the TLC?
I think you're 100% right. It's been in turmoil. And I think that the challenge has been to kind of take a global view and try to get all the pieces and all the information you can together at one time so you really can figure out how best to address, to figure out what is the role that this industry should play in the new economy, in the new transportation dynamics that we have in urban areas. And once you can try to, it's always changing, but you want to, as best as you can, try to wrap your arms around it, and then figure out what is the best structure system that's going to work for the priorities that you established. And to me, the two priorities are the passengers, which are the clients, and the drivers. Many of which they share. And as long as we can do that, that I think is the way to make it work best. This is a congested city, and it is only getting much more congested, much more congested. There's an interesting statistic that says that there are fewer linear miles of roadway in the city of New York today than there were in 1960. So that we have more vehicles, and a high percentage of those vehicles are for hire vehicles. So they play a larger and larger role, they move more and more people, and we must figure out the best, most comprehensive way to have this industry serve the people who need them and the people who provide the services, which are the drivers. And it must be done in an economically equitable way so that the people are compensated and the people aren't paying too much for the fares. What are all the answers? I don't have all the answers. This gentleman said none of us have all the answers.
I understand that, but soon enough you're going to have to confront some hard questions about
No
this. So
doubt
how do you
about it.
balance pay versus pay from the, how do you balance good pay against the consumer paying too much inside the vehicle?
Our job is we have to find a way to regulate that, which we have the power to do. And we have the right to structure this. We must find the way to structure the division of the fare such that the drivers get the fair, equitable part of that fare that they need to do without putting it on the backs of the riding public. What does that mean? It means in the end that the app, the riding app, and the people that, look, the city does this all the time. You want to do business in this city because we have this and this and this and this and this and this. People want to do business here. Well, you know what? You want to do business here as a private company, you got to pay for that. So I think that the ride apps are the ones that are going to have to make the adjustments, and are going to be forced to make the adjustments so that the other two entities have more fair, equitable.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sorrentino. You're there already, but what do you see right now is the biggest challenge at the TLC?
Well, as I said earlier, I think the biggest challenge is a balance, establishing a balance on all levels, okay? It's not just one issue, as we know. And I think, right now, dealing with congestion is obviously a priority. Secondly, I think driver pay and having a certain amount of cars on the road is part of that, and making sure that the outer boroughs are well served as well. I think, one of the things, the boroughs, the outer boroughs seem to be the forgotten child. The green cabs would be an attempt to try to help that. A pilot was just recently put out for Street Hill liveries to try to get some other cars out there. I think all of those type ideas have to be thought about. And I think, the key is trying to get a balance and keeping the amount of cars within a certain range. I know we have a cap in place for hire vehicles. That's being monitored every 6 months, which I think we need to continue doing that. So it's just really a matter, I think all the issues have been identified. It's a matter of just monitoring them and making sure that we're making the right choices and pivoting when we have to.
Thank you. I agree with what they've both said. I'll add on the topic of conversion to electric vehicles, which I think will be an interesting challenge in terms of deploying enough charging stations around the city and distributing them effectively and equitably, as well as being able to identify a workforce that can maintain a new type of vehicle that requires different mechanical skills.
Great. We just heard some very good suggestions. I think one of the issues we need to look at is to find ways to increase vehicle utilization and therefore revenue for medallion taxis. But the comments about electric vehicle and others those are clearly very important as well.
Can you give us ideas, recommendations for how you increase utilization of the yellow taxi?
The recent pilot program where Uber can dispatch through Carbon Arrow to taxis, that's the potential of increasing utilization of medallion taxis. It is obviously too early to tell, but we should not stop thinking of ideas to help the medallion taxis.
Okay. I want to go back just to, you mentioned electric vehicles, and there's this discussion about the cap that the city council put in place, I forget how many years ago now, to limit the amount of vehicles that are for hire vehicles on the street and to increase utilization as well. And obviously I represent the congested core of Midtown. We've all talked about congestion, and that was an aim to try to reduce the amount of idling for hire vehicles on the street. There is a discussion, and there's been, I think, some announcements around whether the use of electric vehicles should be in that cap or should be outside of that cap in an effort to promote more electric vehicles for hire vehicles. And so I'd just be curious on your take on that. Should the cap stay inclusive of all vehicles, or should there be exemptions made for electric vehicles?
I think that, once again, as we're talking about a balance, I think that the balance needs to be found, which is something I would look forward to exploring. I do think that it's intelligent of TLC to be rolling out the green licenses slowly so that there's kind of a turnover to these new electric vehicles, because we are facing that 2030 deadline. But I still think I'll need to explore it further before I give a full answer on that question.
Could be a vote that comes to you early on as a commissioner. So if presented to you as an opportunity to expand electric vehicles, allowing a cushion in the cap for those, or keep a hard cap, how would you vote?
I would vote to have any vehicle type, as long as it's a small operator with kind of 6 licenses or fewer.
To be able to allow to be, okay. I wanted to talk to Mr. Bader, Mrs. Sorrentino. You guys both mentioned congestion, which we're talking about with the cap as well. The city and the state are going to be implementing congestion pricing soon. There's a big question, I think, before the panel and those in the state about how to handle for hire vehicles and taxis. Should they be charged per trip, which would be quite expensive for I think, should they be charged a one-time fee? Can you guys, it comes to the TLC asking for an opinion on how vehicles should be handled in the congestion pricing scheme. What do you guys recommend?
Well, as we know, there are also charges in place already that the transportation sector pays. So I think anything that's put on top of that needs to be really thought about and analyzed. So it's hard to come up with a real hard and quick answer, but I think we've got to keep in mind that they've already contributed many, many dollars over many years. And anything that will go on top of that, we need to be mindful of. And it's also going to affect the riding public. You know, if they're going to have to pay, well, how will that affect, you know, utilization of transportation as well? So I think it needs to be thought about and analyzed.
Thanks.
So I come from Queens, and I've lived in Brooklyn. So I've never been a fan, to some extent, of some of the
I won't hold
existing
either of
prices.
those things against you.
It's
Don't
okay.
worry.
Appreciate it. I also lived in Manhattan. My belief in this issue and a lot of other issues has always been that if you are representing an industry, I want to be proactive and not reactive. So as I've indicated before, I think that we, representing the taxi and the taxi industry, the hire vehicle industry, need to figure out what is in the best interest of the people that we represent, both the drivers and the riding public, and that should be part of our input relative to how this industry is dealt with in congestion pricing. However, so that's what I think to be studied, and we want to make our presentation to whomever we're going to have to make at the state level or the city level to enable that. But I do not believe that a ride from one place over to one street or a ride to another, to the same distance, to 2 streets further, there should be a surcharge for that. No. I also think that New York City was developed in a way that put a predominance of certain services on the island of Manhattan. However, the great majority of the people who partake of those services no longer are just people who live in Manhattan, but they live in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, and some in Staten Island. And so to charge these people more money to partake of those services than other people goes back to my big concern about equity and fairness. So if you have to go to one of the many, many hospitals in Manhattan, and most of them are in your district.
Outside of the congestion pricing zone, many
of them are, but not all of them. So that NYU is in the district, as we know. So, and these institutions just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and they draw from further and further. So my concern is for these people to to pay more for that. I don't really think is equitable.
Okay. I want to hand it over to our Transportation Chair, Councilmember Brooks Powers, and then we'll hear from Councilmember Sanchez.
Thanks so much, Chair. A couple of questions for you. First of all, thank you for your comments, your presentation. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Ms. Kaufman, in terms of your experience, and of course the Queen's selection. We appreciate the information you give, the insight that you give as a driver. And I know there has been a push to make sure that on the TLC commission that we have representation for drivers, to make sure that we are centering what's happening in the industry right now as we try to navigate the crisis that's been existing for the last couple of years. I'd like to know from each of you, what is your opinion on whether we should allow commuter vans to accept street hails?
Probably go last as you run out of things to say. Thank you for the question. As we know, commuter vans play an integral part of providing transportation access to the outer boroughs. We should, first of all, continue the work that TLC has done to help commuter vans extend their reach to places where that are traditionally underserved by mass transit. We should also support state-level efforts to regulate commuter vans and work with industries to establish safe and economical operation of these vans. Insofar as allowing commuter vans to function as street hail vehicles, that is something that probably needs a little more study. How does it work in relations to medallion taxis? How do they work on routes, or do they do they drive until the van is full before they depart? So I think there are a lot of issues that need to be studied before judgment can be made on, a decision can be made on that question.
Thank you. I'm well aware that commuter vans serve a population that's often underserved by public transportation, and that the ridership tends to be taking commuter vans to centrally located subway stations and sometimes more central bus stops. So I know that they are an essential daily service for outer borough commuters, especially. I do, like Mr. Chan said, I do think that we should be working closely with the state to ensure the safe operation of these vehicles. And in terms of street hails, I think that further analysis would be needed in terms of how it interacts not just with street hail taxis, but also how it might intersect with public transit service, for example, serving on fixed routes that may overlap with MTA service, and how those two would intersect. So it's something I'm very interested in, obviously helping to provide an essential service, and I hope that it can be continued in a safe way.
Hi, I believe that the commuter vans play an important role, and I think they provide a valuable service to the community, especially in the outer boroughs. I live in Brooklyn, I live near Kings Plaza, and we see unfortunately, a lot of illegal commuter vans, which I believe is a risk to the riding public. And I know the TLC's enforcement division, unfortunately, is undermanned to handle all the illegal commuter van activity in the city. But that's the byproduct of the commuter vans, and there's a need for it. People want it, whether they go to a central shopping location or they go to they're taking a van to a subway. Where I live in the Mill Basin, Bergen Beach area, there are no there's no transportation to a subway, so you need to take either an Uber, or you got to call a cab, through an app, or so on. So there is a need, and the people where I live do utilize them. So I think there is something that we should continue with. Just make sure we oversee it and monitor it properly.
Thank you. So now it's my turn to basically agree with what's been said before. Certainly, I remember when they started, and they fulfilled an incredible need for underserved underserved communities, particularly in Brooklyn and part in Queens. And I would say that in their favor, that they are responsible, along with other newer and revised means of transportation, in the development and the growth of certain communities where people were a little questionable about living because they were concerned about how they were going to commute to different places. So they played a role in the growth of New York, and they continue to be a part of a viable part of the transportation system. They are now involved in a more complicated transportation system, indicated by the fact that we now have, for hire vehicles that, and the whole industry, and we have, plug in your Revel now is, and rent what was the other company that you could just, there's all these different ways now in which you can get around and rent a car or have somebody drive you or get on a van. So the key, again, is to ensure that they are regulated in a safe and viable way that fits into the rest of the for-hire vehicle transportation network that needs to go in the city. But clearly, they have played a role. They will continue to play a role. They should play a role, and we just have to make sure that it is done in a safe and economically fair way.
Thank you for the response. This question again is for the panel. How do you feel about the impact of congestion pricing on the for-hire vehicle industry? And should taxis and for-hire vehicles be exempt from the new congestion charge?
I thought we just kind of answered that in the
I'm sorry, I missed it. I stepped out, so if you could just let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I indicated that I thought we should be proactive. Whatever that we decide what is the best role and the best way that the for-hire vehicle needs to operate relative to the parameters that are set if we do ever really get to congestion pricing, which I still have doubts about. But the challenge really is it must be fair and equitable, and many of what I've heard as to how they want to do surcharges on for-hire vehicles, which is, Mr. Sorrentino said, sometimes it's on top of another surcharge that people are paying, just doesn't seem to be fair and equitable.
I think I had mentioned this earlier. As Paul indicated, we currently, there is a charge already being paid by passengers, and the for-hire vehicle sector and the medallions have contributed quite a few dollars over the past years into this fund for the MTA. So I think anything that comes down as new, as if congestion pricing does come down and get approved eventually, that needs to be looked at, because we don't want to burn the drivers as well as the passengers with additional costs. I think that needs to be balanced. And I just read over the weekend that the federal government just came out and approved the environmental aspect of it. So it looks like it's going to move on to the state now for their determination. So I think at that level, it needs to be looked at where there can be a balance. And I think that's the key. Thank you.
I think the purpose of congestion pricing, obviously, is the fund for the MTA, but also to reduce the amount of congestion in Manhattan, in the central business district. And to that effect, the idea is to incentivize people to leave their private vehicles at home. And so I think that taxis and for-hire vehicles are an essential ingredient in order to have people be able to move around the city door to door if they are not able to take public transit or another mode. So I do think that, so I do hope that the state takes that into account, that these door-to-door trips are essential for reducing congestion on the streets.
And I would just add that, again, the taxis and for-hire vehicles already pay a surcharge into the congestion pricing. I would just like to emphasize the impact on consumers. Depending on what the toll is set at, that makes the ride potentially very expensive. So the impact on consumers needs to be considered.
Thank you. I wanted to ask just a few individual questions, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Chan. First, can you walk us through what experience you have that's relevant to TLC? The Commission's mandate includes licensing and regulating the city's yellow cabs for hire vehicles, commuter vans, and paratransit vehicles, setting cab rates, so on and so forth. So can you point specifically to any work experience you have related to any of these responsibilities?
I would say the most relevant experience applicable to TLC is that I have dealt with very complex organizations and systems, as well as very complex regulatory frameworks. I think TLC is similar in that sense, in that it operates within the regulatory framework. It is a regulatory commission, and I think my experience dealing with regulations, operating within regulatory frameworks, can help me navigate many issues that TLC faces. Secondly, having worked at 3 U.S. high-tech companies, 2 of which still are very, very large, I had to navigate a lot of issues working with different organizations, divisions, product lines, multitude of stakeholders. I think the ability to collaborate with a multitude of people dealing with complex issues should lend itself to help address issues and challenges that TLC faces.
Now, when you say navigate issues that TLC faces, because there's a lot of nuanced issues, especially when you talk about the medallion dynamic, when you talk about the licensing of these for-hire vehicles and all of those dynamics. Can you walk me through how you feel that experience will help you navigate some of these pressing issues that TLC is faced with today?
Sure. So for any of those issues that you just mentioned, there are multiple stakeholders.
Just pick one, because I want you to walk me through.
Oh, okay, sure. Let's take EV, right? You know, we have a 2030 Green Initiative. There is a pilot program for up to 1,000 EV licenses that could be issued. In implementing EV for tax season for hire vehicles, it is necessary to make electric vehicle tax season for hire vehicles financially attractive for that conversion to take place. Moreover, we can't run electric vehicle tax season for hire vehicles unless there is sufficient fast charging stations that are accessible and strategically located. So the provider for that infrastructure would involve at least Con Edison, public-private partners, and on the cost or defraying the cost of using electrical vehicles for tax season for hire vehicles. You know, we need to, or we could consider working with federal government, state government, and private foundations for rebates, credits, grants to make that transformation possible. So my ability, my experience in working with large groups of people with different interests and needs, I think could lend itself to help address, communicate, and work with a multitude of stakeholders.
So staying on the line with the electric for hire vehicle, with which you know the mayor has committed to 100% of the fleet by 2030, and I'm going to ask you and the rest of the panel, how can the city get there?
There are obstacles, no doubt. First of all, we got to make sure that when deploying EVs for tax season for hire vehicles, that transition from a owner-driver standpoint as well as company standpoint, that transition has to be financially attractive. The second obstacle is, again, the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure. So the commission, and this is part of the charged up roadmap that the commission has contemplated, is to again work with these public and private partners to explore what financial incentives can be brought to bear to make EVs financially attractive. And on the infrastructure, again, we need Con Edison to work. We need whether it's property owners or properties that the city own or fleet headquarters, we need lots of fast charging stations to make this happen.
And if the rest of the panel can answer.
I agree with what Mr. Chown said. I think that we'll need fast chargers distributed throughout the city that are universal to all vehicle types. And we will also need a workforce that knows how to maintain the vehicles, which are a different operating system than traditional gas-powered vehicles. And of course, TLC is slowly rolling out EV-only licenses, and so I believe that will need to be continued to incentivize and require the transition to electric vehicles.
Thank you. There is a mandate and a commitment, as you noted, to move in that direction by 2030. I think obviously the infrastructure is going to be part of that equation. So obviously that has to move in real time with the rollout. What the TLC has started doing with the 1,000 vehicles is the beginning. And I think we're going to continue to monitor that and expand it. And I think it all has to be done hand in hand to get a balance, because as we all know, we need to make sure the economic considerations also are played into that as well. Thank you.
Like a lot of other things, you need the will and the desire to make it happen. We have plenty of time to do it. This is New York City. We have some of the smartest people in the world here who have a variety of experiences. And you put all of that together and you get your heads together and you figure out how to solve the problem. There is nothing that I have seen that this city can't do if it dedicates itself and commits itself to doing. And this is not this is not the most complicated problem in the world by far. And we have the resources across the board to be able to make this happen. And so we just have to commit and we'll make it happen. And this commission and the staff, which has been indicated before, is top-notch. And the commissioners who are dedicated and committed will do what has to be done, I think, to make it happen.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I do have to run to another commitment, so my colleague is going to pick back up on that one. But I have one last question, and that is, what role can TLC play in improving paratransit in New York City? And that's for the whole panel.
That's a little more complicated. I think one of the challenges for government all the time is after they set regulations, they don't, the follow-through is not always there. And a policy or a regulation in and of itself doesn't solve the problem. We've certainly seen that in other major issues in the city. So the follow-through and making sure that, especially when the government agency involves third parties that it contracts out with, there must be supervision and oversight given to those contracts to make sure that who's ever contracted is doing the job the way it needs to be done. We have an aging population across America. We have an aging population in New York, so the need for that is only increasing, and I think that we have to address it in a fair way and make sure that and an oversight way to make sure that the services that are needed are done correctly and accurately and in a timely manner.
I believe that this is an important area as well, knowing that there's a need for that transportation service. And I think one of the attributes of the recent pilot program with the Street Hails will allow carriers and livery services to be able to serve that need. So I believe that this is something that we've identified and that we have to continue to put resources to and monitor. Thank you.
This is something I see as extremely important. I do understand that TLC is increasing the percentage of vehicles, or will hope to increase the percentage of vehicles to be more, to have more vehicles be wheelchair accessible. I think we also need to be thinking through other forms of disabilities, not just mobility, but also vision impairments, hearing impairments, as well as cognitive impairments. And these are all disabilities that need to be addressed through paratransit, which, as you know, is an unfunded mandate, but because the city subsidizes paratransit along with the MTA, I think it's in the city's best interest to explore other ways to provide services for people who rely on that service.
Yeah, I think it's important that all New Yorkers can get a ride, whether they have challenges or not. I think Mr. Bader's comment is very insightful. I think the TLC should work with, on increasing paratransit vehicles and accessibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've also been joined by Councilmember Gail Brewer. We'll now hear from Councilmember Sanchez, followed by Councilmember Brewer.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And just to immediately follow up on Councilmember Savina Brooks Powers' question about electrification, love the enthusiasm. We can do it, but what are some specific ideas or contours that you think we're going to have to think about? Who are we going to have to engage with? What are we going to have to do in order to actually make it happen, right? The city's vehicle fleet and then making electric access available to the public.
I am a big believer in shared services. I think that too many times we have public facilities that are designated for only one use when there are other accessory uses that could take advantage of that, and we don't provide that opportunity. So we're living in a world right now where it's not just the taxi industry, the for-hire vehicle industry that's growing relative to electric cars, but it's electric vehicles all across. And there are incentives that are going to happen and are going to continue to happen. So it is our responsibility to work with similarly minded folks and industries so that we can have shared services. There are many garages, there are supermarkets, there are shopping centers all in different places that have decided that it is their in economic interest to provide charging services. So as Ms. Calvin said, we want to make sure that it's a universal one. We don't want to have different ones that are not that don't match up. So we have to look at what makes sense, what exists, and how we, as the city of New York, the great advantage that government has is we have long-term view. So that we have to use that to our advantage. So we want to figure out who has a like-minded interest and how we can work with them together so that it benefits the needs of the city, which is the for-hire vehicle, as well as any other, whether it's private trucking, or whether it's delivery vans, or whether it's UPS, or whether it's FedEx, or any other thing, or whether it's just a car dealership, and so that we can do this in a most efficient and cost-effective way.
As one of the other council members had mentioned, is that the mayor had mandated that we're going to be moving in that direction. And obviously, the mandate that the commitment that the TLC has, and the mandate to navigate that to 2030, obviously there's a plan to do that. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the infrastructure is a big part of that. We have to make sure that the infrastructure built out throughout the whole city allows for what we need, both for the TLC to regulate properly, as well as all the other pieces that go to that. And the other part of it, I believe, we have to make sure that it's economically beneficial for everybody to want to do that. The drivers want to invest in vehicles that allow them to do that. Because we've had so many issues, as we know, with driver pay over the years, and we're just trying to get to a point where maybe we're getting flat, where we're addressing those issues, we can't go backwards. So I think that's an important part of the equation.
I echo my co-panelists' sentiments on having evenly distributed charging services that are universal to every vehicle type, and ensuring that the licenses go out especially to electric vehicles. In addition, we'll have to work with the state more fully to help ensure that the electric grid is up to the task of charging so many vehicles at once.
As my co-panelists have mentioned, and they have mentioned numerous good ideas, along the lines of what Mr. Bader said, Walmart, maybe not in New York City, and Kroger Supermarket, in fact, have set up charging stations, and it's really, not only do they get the revenue from the charging, they also get people to stop by and do some shopping as well. So I think the idea of shared services is excellent. I think deploying EVs for taxis and for hire vehicles is actually a very exciting transformation. There's would be less pollution. The vehicles would be quieter, and actually I think some of the standard safety features or safety features found in EVs could, when deployed as taxis and for hire vehicles, could actually make it safer for drivers, passengers, and the public. I think the limited license release for EVs up to 1,000, I think it is a very good entry into transitioning EVs for taxi and for hire vehicle uses. I think from that pilot program, we could potentially learn a lot about some of the challenges that we may not now know. But I do think that TLC's charged up roadmap has a lot of good suggestions.
Thank you so much for your responses. Yeah, I mean, as a new owner of an electric vehicle, you know, whose home is not able to charge the car, it's very true. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure challenges here. So just have one more question. I had the chance to speak to Mr. Chan and Sarah. I had a chance to speak with you two, but I'd love to ask you here on the record about, you know, protecting driver pay. And Commissioner, you were on the TLC during the very controversial legislation that passed in 2019, and then, you know, there's been subsequent rulemaking processes about how you protect driver pay and ensure a minimum pay standard. So for me, that's one of the biggest issues facing the industry. I represent thousands of drivers that work for Uber and Lyft and the for-hire vehicle app companies. And so my question is, how do you, firstly, how do you protect driver pay? What is next for the TLC in protecting driver pay? And secondly, you know, thinking about the cap on new vehicles on the road, new for-hire vehicles on the road, a lot of my drivers in my district have talked about the creation of a black market and of abuses that the cap that was meant for limiting congestion has actually created a black market and is hurting our folks on the ground. What are your thoughts about how we can address that and protect these individuals who are the fabric of our communities?
Well, thank you for that. You hit the nail on the head. Those are always issues and challenges that are going to be continuous. We are at that point now where we put regulations in place, and I'm happy to say I did vote for them. So my record stands for itself. I've been on the commission for the last 6.5 years, as I mentioned in my opening statement, and I've heard a lot of testimony over the years from a lot of different people and a lot of sad stories. And we've done a lot to try to address a lot of those things, starting with accessibility, the medallion values, driver pay concerns. And the last set of regulations that we passed with driver pay, I thought were fair, and they were mindful of all the pieces to the puzzle, because it's not just one thing in a vacuum. Everything has an impact to another part of the industry, if you will. So I think, you know, all the things that the commissioners past and present have put in place are things that have been thoughtful, analyzed, and I think we need to be mindful going forward that we don't go into a path that could set us backwards. So I think, you know, we just need to be vigilant and be mindful and thoughtful in our decisions. Thank you.
Anytime you're working in an industry that has government regulation, the only entity that can ensure that the individual worker is protected is going to be that government entity. And therefore, because we all know that the company that's not even at arm's length as they used to be, but they're living up in the metasphere, doesn't care about the individual driver. It's just another code, just another number in their electronic dashboard. So when you have these situations, the only protection, the only entity that can protect the driver and ensure that they're going to be represented is going to be the government entity. And therefore, that is the responsibility of the Taxi and Limousine Commission in New York City, to protect and ensure that the workers are getting the fair shake of the work, for the work that they do. pretty simple.
But do you have any specific thoughts on what the TLC could be doing? What kind of policies can be pursued to protect these workers?
They recently passed some regulations which I was supportive of, and it was a step in the right direction, and we have to continue in that direction. We have to ensure that we have to ensure that any time, it's almost like we have to police the apps. They're gonna continue to try to maximize their profit at the expense of the rider and the driver. That's what their investors want. That's what their executives want. That's what motivates them. And so we're on the other side. We have to protect the other side. We have to protect the riders and we have to protect the drivers. And so we're going to have to do any and all regulations. But you're asking me, one of the reasons why I'm answering this way is because as we're sitting here, they have their computer guys trying to figure out how they can play with their algorithms so that they can get more for themselves at the expense of the driver and the riding public. So we have to continually be vigilant in trying to anticipate a plan, or even in my case, try to be proactive so that we can offset that and that we protect the drivers and the riding public. And that's all we have to do and continue to do that. And so whatever we have to do, we need to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as we all know, most drivers are immigrants with modest means. They typically as Mr. Bader shared firsthand experience, they work pretty long and hard hours to make ends meet. So it is important that we support drivers to make a decent living. I think the 2022 taximeter rate increase and the 2023 driver pay increase and changes the calculation for the for-hire vehicle driver pay have had positive impact on driver pay. And those are areas that TLC should continue to be vigilant about and keep a supervision of.
Thank you, and I appreciate that this is a huge challenge, especially for residents of your district. Echoing the sentiments of my co-panelists, I think that one area that I think TLC is doing well handling this on is by prioritizing kind of low number of licenses, like 6 or fewer licenses, to distribute smaller numbers so that there isn't this kind of hoarding problem. I also think that there's a bit of optimism through the Medallion Relief Program, as well as medallions kind of coming out of storage because of the Medallion Relief Program, as well as the increase in demand for transportation services as we somewhat emerge from the economic impacts of COVID. So hopefully it's looking up in your district as well.
Thank you. I just want to talk about yellow cabs because I don't care about the other cabs. I'm from Manhattan. And so my question is, what are some ideas you have for making sure that that industry is whole, satisfied from driver to passenger? Some drivers hate curb, hate Allure, and then a friend of mine the other day, she got charged $60 to go from one side of Central Park to the other using curb. So there's issues with that. And how would you address keeping the yellow cab industry more whole? How would you address curb and Allure if they are successful? There are, I believe, thousands of cars in the garages. How would you get them on the streets? And do you think the green cars, I guess they're disappearing, what's going to happen as a result? Those are some issues, and then I have more. But I'm all about the yellow cabs. I do not care about
I'll
those
start
other
off
ones.
first, if you don't mind. As I mentioned earlier, being on the commission for the last 6.5 years, and we've seen what's happened to the yellow yellow medallions and all the sad stories. You know, I think one of the things that the TLC did in capping the 4 high vehicle licenses was start. Obviously, a little too late, unfortunately, but it was a start with the right goal to try to keep the balance somewhat back to normal, even though it's still way high than it should be, as we know. So I think that is something that we need to continually monitor. I know every 6 months we check the results of how that's moving, and we make adjustments if we need to. So that needs to continue to be done. The medallion relief program that we passed for the medallion owners with large debt was important and vital, and I voted for that twice, the enhanced one as well, so I'm proud of that. So I believe, you know, we need to continue. It's iconic. The yellow, I live in New York my whole life, and I plan on staying here for a long time. So I don't think anybody wants to see the yellow cabs go away. So I think we need to do everything that makes them stay, makes the drivers earn a living that's fair and economical, and wants them to invest in a medallion. So I think we need to try to keep the value of the medallion within reason. It can't fluctuate up and down. We need to do things that don't make that happen. So I think a lot of things that are in place now are the right things, but it's like anything else. In order to keep that balance with everything going on and the changes ahead, we need to continually monitor that. But I think we're starting to emerge in the right direction.
You think they're out of the garages? There are more cars out of the garages now?
Some are coming out, and I think the fact that there's more of a desire to travel, and I think, you know, people are coming out more. I mean, I work in Manhattan. My firm basically worked remotely for a long time. Now we're back 2-3 days a week. We're trying to get people to come back more and more. And I'm in Manhattan 2, 3, 4 days a week myself, and I see it getting busier, which
I'm here
makes me
7
feel
days a
happy.
week.
And I believe it. I live in Brooklyn, so I travel back and forth. But I see the change, and I think it's a good thing. And I personally try to use a cab when I'm in the central business district, and you know, I hail them, and I don't use the app for that. I actually try to
I
find
have to be
one.
dead before I use the
So,
app.
but I think that does give them an opportunity for additional rides. So I know the pricing could be problematic, but I think it's another way they could hopefully have more rides as well. Thank you.
Okay. Any other suggestions on yellow? And will the green have any impact? And I hope you're all against charging the yellows for congestion pricing.
Sure. So, thank you, Mr. Sorrentino, for covering much of this subject. I have used the apps Curb and Arrow in the past, and I agree that the user experience could use an update. That is one way to make the yellow taxis more competitive. Another is to explore more of a formal partnership with paratransit services.
Yes.
And another is to explore the possibility of things like parcel or meal deliveries offered by yellow taxis. Those are just some of the ideas to explore. In terms of congestion pricing, you know, the goal, one of the two goals, other than subsidizing the MTA, is to reduce congestion in the central business district.
I'm aware of the goal.
Okay, so in order to reduce private car usage in the central business district of Manhattan, I think that taxis and for-hire vehicles are an essential ingredient of that service. And so I think that when the state evaluates this possibility of having a surcharge on these vehicles, I hope they would take into account how necessary these vehicles are for people to get from door to door.
And they already charge a lot.
Yes.
Any other suggestions for the yellow cabs? And what about my green cabs? I love those green cabs.
So lots of suggestions on yellow cabs. I would just say, combining that question with the medallions and storage, I think we essentially need to increase vehicle utilization, which in part is a function of the demand and the economy, severely impacted by the pandemic, of course, right? But as Mr. Sorrentino suggested, about 800 medallions were released in the past year, and the ridership, the revenue all increased. So as the pandemic has come to an end, then hopefully we'll see ridership increase for yellow cabs, which would then drive revenue and make that segment of the industry more viable. Yeah.
Yay, Bader. Go Bader.
Hello, Gail. Having driven a yellow cab, I think that there are things we can do, and one of the things that we can do in recognition of the contribution that the yellow cab industry has made and its historical relevance in New York City is that when possible, they should be given priority. This is particularly true at places like the airports, where now not only are they not, we had this discussion earlier, not only are they not given priority, they're given second-class citizenship someplace because their locations are less desirable and they're not, and the for hire of people who basically think that there's no control over what they do, and so they tend to operate sometimes in ways that are out of control. So where possible, the yellow cab should have the priority, whether it's locations or positions, whether it's spots on the street, especially in certain areas. That's the easiest way to deal with it. The idea of the green was an idea that probably was a little late in coming about. It would have been much better to have those green taxis 20, 30, 40 years ago, but when they were rolled out, it was almost overlapping with the private for hire vehicle and the apps, and it kind of got lost. And what ended up happening basically was the apps ended up serving a lot of those communities that were needed, that were underserved, and the apps were the ones that ended up serving those underserved communities in those areas where the green taxis, were designated to assist riders. So that was an unfortunate thing, and that's why some of the new regs have kind of adjusted that, because maybe we have to look at that and figure out, okay, how do we take those drivers and what's the best use of an alternative kind of situation for those communities. But clearly, yes, the yellow taxi should be number one, and they should be given priority where feasible and where it makes sense to do so.
I would just say uptown, I'm in Harlem all the time, and what will happen when the green cars go is that the apps cars will continue to be cash only. I always have cash on me because you can often get a for hire for cash, because that's what's going to happen. I've been doing illegal cabs my whole life. I love illegal cabs. You pay less money and you get a nice ride.
Yeah.
So I'm just letting you know that's what's going to happen when the green cars go, at least in Manhattan. I don't know the other boroughs. So that'll be the new way of getting around, just FYI. Just finally, on electric cars, I'm all for them, obviously, but in Manhattan it's a challenge. Wherever you have a street electric, then people park in that spot, so you can't plug in. It takes a long time because it's slower than what's in the garages. We have one mall. I don't think it's going to work for plug-ins. We have no malls. We have no space. We have no parking. I don't know where you're going to find this plug-in in the borough of Manhattan. So when you keep talking about it, it's got to have a whole different approach if we're going to do it here, because nobody has a house to plug into. And then finally, data. Thanks to Mira and Bill, you got a lot of data. So my question quickly is, how would you use this data? Obviously, you coordinate with other agencies, et cetera, but how would you use this immense data more than any other agency, I think, in the whole city?
Data lady, she should go first, the data lady.
Go ahead.
Sure, so,
I call it the Mira Bill data.
okay, great.
With all due respect to the new commissioner, they did it. Go ahead.
I'm so glad to be able to see to have access to this data. I think that, I don't want to dive into the data without a problem to solve. So I think that it's important to look into what the solutions are that we're trying to develop, and maybe they're based on service needs or more street hail or for-hire vehicle services in a certain location at a certain time. And maybe they're not meeting the demand of different services. Maybe it can be mapping out where the chargers are, or where drivers, where the shift change happens, to be more useful of the time that's allowed. So I think that there are a few different ways data could be used, and I'm excited to dive into it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thank everyone here for your testimony, and once again, congratulate you on your nomination, and appreciate your thoughtful feedback. We're going to have some testimony from the public. You guys are adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to call up a panel of individuals from the public. We'll have Christopher Leon Johnson and Raul Rivera.
Okay, let's set this up.
Hi guys, we're going to give you 2 minutes each, which we'll put onto the clock. You guys come in.
All right, good afternoon, Chair Powers. This is Christopher Leon Johnson here. So I'm here to speak in opposition to the appointment of Sarah Kaufman. The reason I oppose her appointment is because there's a big conflict of interest that's going on. The speaker disclosed her affiliation to Transportation Alternatives that get funded by you guys, the city council, $77,500, including $4,000 from Majority Whip Powers. This looks like more like a blackmail appointment, because Transportation Alternatives has a lot of power with elected officials, where if you go against them, they will primary you, they will fund your opponent, and they will bury you in the media. That's kind of like a career ender for you. You could lose your job, including you, Powers. I mean, Chair Powers, you have your thing with Transportation Alternatives. I want to say this. I don't know about the law. I know committee counsel if you have the time to explain this. Majority Whip Powers, Brooks Powers need to abstain her vote because she funds Transportation Alternatives. Most likely she won't abstain her vote. She will say yes. Majority of you guys will say yes because you guys are scared of them. But this need to go to the speaker, and if she gets appointed, Sarah Kaufman gets appointed to this as a commission, she needs to resign from the board of the Transportation Alternatives. She sits on the board of Transportation Alternatives. She did not disclose that in her statement. None of you guys point that up to her. Say, I understand she has a thing with Rebel because of Transportation Alternatives. They fund TransAlt, but she needs to resign from the board of Transportation Alternatives if she was be selected as a nominee, like to be appointed on the board of the commission. So that's all I need to say. You guys, I can't say you guys don't need to vote for her. I say you guys need not to nominate her. But with Brooks Powers, she needs to abstain her vote. The Speaker Adams, she needs to abstain her vote. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have council review any conflicts, but I'm not aware of any that are direct conflicts right now to require an absentee vote. Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
Good afternoon. My name is Raul Rivera. I'm a New York City TLC driver advocate. I'm the founder of NYC Drivers Unite, the only group in New York City seeking the reform of the Taxi Limousine Commission. I'm also a member of Families for Safe Streets, and I'm a crash survivor. The TLC regulates over 100,000 for hire vehicles and 165,000 drivers. Their powers and duties, although sometimes not clearly defined or carried out, are wide-ranging. Their decisions will impact New York City's transportation sector, these small business owners, for decades to come. When considering an agency appointment, it is incumbent upon this considering government body to not only uncover conflicts of interest on the part of a nominee, but even the appearance thereof. It is in this regard that I wish to testify against the nomination of Sarah Kaufman for several causes. One, it is well known that Transportation Alternatives, on whom Ms. Kaufman sits on, funded by many rideshare companies, including Uber, Lyft, Revel, just to name a few. How can it be appropriate for a TLC commissioner to sit on a board influenced by these rideshare companies to function objectively as a commissioner? Two, Ms. Kaufman is the interim executive director of NYU Reading Center for Transportation Policy, a powerful and influential academic body who refuses to divulge who their donors are. Do you see how this lack of disclosure is problematic? Number 3, Revel is the third largest rideshare enterprise in New York City. Revel is directly regulated by the TLC. Ms. Kaufman consulted for Revel, which casts doubt on Ms. Kaufman's ability to be fair and without bias. It is for these reasons that I demand Ms. Kaufman's name to be withdrawn from consideration. Thank you. Please feel free to ask us some questions. You asked the other panel, please ask us some questions.
Thank you. We do have some, currently I believe that Ms. Kaufman does not have any business dealings with the TLC and has sought the advice, I'm just reading this, sought the advice of the Conferences Board about her role right now. I'm reading, I'm not asking questions. And has been told to, like all city employees, is required to consult this conflict of interest board were there to be a potential conflict between her current position at NYU versus while serving on the TLC.
Can I clarify something?
Thank you for, we gave you 2 minutes to testify, so.
You don't have any questions?
We have your testimony, thank you.
I know, but I'm asking if you have any questions. You don't
I don't have any questions, thank you.
You know I'm a driver.
Thank you.
You know I'm a native New Yorker.
Okay.
We have a petition to reform the
Sir,
tax
thank you.
limitation.
You had your 2 minutes to testify.
You're not even curious to ask questions.
Thank you. This hearing's adjourned, thanks.
There you have it. Representation at its best.